Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Praise Yahweh for being able to be together again on a Shabbat that we delight ourselves in, on every Shabbat, not just a Shabbat, but every Shabbat. And just sharing everyone that's joining us online. We have Gillian up very early in the cold US. We've got Renee and Kayla saying Shabbat Shalom from the Rangers in a cold Germany. Kayla's first Shabbat in Germany. Glad you guys can be with us online. We also got Jackie Ferguson in P, Mandy, Carol. Patrick sent me one saying Shalom, I'm online. And Ricardo's also saying Shabbat Shalom. And so good to be together. And we can just share that it is a joy for us to be together. In this time, we're going through a certain season, I suppose. However long that season will be is up to the Master, where we are scattered and we long for the reunion to take place. And, we are thankful that we can connect like this. We are a remnant few that our Master is joining together, and we must remember to encourage one another all the more as we see his day drawing near, not to lose heart, but to remain steadfast in serving him with our all. And I did a couple of tests this week with the stream, so everything seems to be back to the way it should be working. So we praise Yahweh for that. I just hope I get my microphone switching right this week. But you know what? At the end of the day, glitches and all just highlights that this is what family's about. We're not here to put on a production and performance. We are here to perform the Sabbath and set apart to our Master, glitches and all, because it helps us realize that this is what it's about. We really are trusting that our Master will continue to cause us to be able to connect together, and also cause us to keep shining his light, that others may want to join in with us and be part of who we are as an assembly, as a fellowship, as a ministry that is doing our utmost to proclaim his truth in everything we say and do, and be a light to the nations. So praise Yahweh for that. And we thank Yahweh for every one of you that are joining us live, and also our family, our covenant family that joins us online, watching the recordings a little bit later. And we continue to trust for our Master's hand of protection on each and every one of our homes as we keep our eyes fixed on him and him alone. Amen. Okay, so we are now starting with the last book of the Torah of Moshe, Devarim. We're going to read today chapter 1, verse 1 to 3, verse 22. And Kayla, if we get to a stage one day where we can start doing live online readings, and you can continue reading the first chapter, but Jackie's taking on the role now of reading the first chapter. So Devarim 1, verse 1. Okay.
These are the words which Moshe spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness, in the desert plain opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Hatzeroth and Dihazav, 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. And it came to be in the 40th year, in the 11th new moon, on the first day of the new moon, that Moshe spoke to the children of Israel according to all that Yahweh had commanded him concerning them, after he had stricken Sihon, sovereign of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon, and Og, sovereign of Bashan, who dwelt at Ashtaroth in Edrei. Beyond the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moshe undertook to declare this Torah, saying, Yahweh our Elohim spoke to us in Horeb, saying, You have dwelt long enough at this mountain. Turn and set out on your way, and go into the mountains of the Amorites, and to all the neighboring plains in the desert plain, in the mountains, and in the low country, and in the Negev, and on the sea coast, to the land of the Canaanites, and to Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. See, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov, to give to them and their seed after them. And I spoke to you at that time, saying, I am unable to bear you by myself. Yahweh your Elohim has increased you, and see, you are today as numerous as the stars of the heavens. Yahweh Elohim of your fathers is going to add to you 1,000 times more than you are, and bless you as he has spoken to you. How do I bear your pressure and your burden and your strife by myself? Choose men wise and understanding, and known to your tribes, and let me appoint them as your heads. And you answered me and said, The word which you have spoken to us to do is good. And I took the heads of your tribes, wise men and known, and made them heads over you, leaders of thousands and leaders of hundreds and leaders of fifties and leaders of tens, and officers for your tribes. And I commanded your judges at that time, saying, when hearing between your brothers, judge righteously between a man and his brother or the stranger who is with him. Do not show partiality in right ruling. Hear the small as well as the great. Do not be afraid of anyone's face, for the right rulings belong to Elohim, and the case which is too hard for you, bring it to me, and I shall hear it. And I commanded you at that time all the words which you should do. Then we set out from Horeb and went through all that great and awesome wilderness which you saw on the way to the mountains of the Amorites, as Yahweh our Elohim has commanded us, and we came to Kadesh Barnea. And I said to you, you have come to the mountains of the Amorites, which Yahweh our Elohim is giving us. See, Yahweh our Elohim has set the land before you. Go up and possess it, as Yahweh Elohim of your fathers has spoken to you. Do not fear nor be discouraged. And all of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us, and let them search out the land for us, and bring back word to us of the way by which we should go up, and of the cities into which we would come. And the matter was good in my eyes, so I took 12 of your men, one man from each tribe. And they turned and went up into the mountains, and came to the Wadi Eshkol and spied it out. And they took some of the fruit of the land in their hands, and brought it down to us. And they brought back word to us, saying, the land which Yahweh our Elohim is giving us is good. But you would not go up, and rebelled against the mouth of Yahweh our Elohim, and grumbled in your tents, and said, because Yahweh was hating us, he has brought us out of the land of Mitzrayim, to give us into the hand of the Amorites, to destroy us. Where are we going to? Our brothers have made our hearts melt, saying, the people are greater and taller than we, the cities are great and walled up to the heavens, and we saw the sons of the Anakim there too. Then I said to you, have no dread or fear of them. Yahweh your Elohim, who is going before you, he does fight for you, according to all he did for you in Mitzrayim before your eyes, and in the wilderness, where you saw how Yahweh your Elohim has borne you, as a man bears his son, in all the way that you went until you came to this place. Yet in this matter you are putting no trust in Yahweh your Elohim, who is going before you in the way to seek out a place for you to pitch your tents, to show you the way you should go, in fire by night and in a cloud by day. And Yahweh heard the voice of your words, and was wroth, and took an oath, saying, not one of these men of this evil generation shall see that good land of which I swore to give to your fathers, except Caleb son of Jephunneh. He shall see it, and to him and his children I give the land on which he walked, because he followed Yahweh completely. And Yahweh was enraged with me for your sakes, saying, you do not go in there either. Yehoshua the son of Nun, who stands before you, he shall go in there. Strengthen him, for he shall cause Israel to inherit. And you little ones and your children, who you say are for a prey, who today have no knowledge of good and evil, they are going in there, and to them I give it, and they are to possess it. But you, turn and take your journey into the wilderness by the way of the Sea of Reeds. Then you answered and said to me, we have sinned against Yahweh. We ourselves are going up, and we shall fight, as Yahweh our Elohim commanded us. And when each one of you had girded on his battle gear, you were ready to go up into the mountain. And Yahweh said to me, say to them, do not go up nor fight, for I am not in your midst, lest you be smitten before your enemies. So I spoke to you, but you would not listen, and rebelled against the mouth of Yahweh, and acted proudly, and went up into the mountain. Then the Amorites who dwelt in that mountain came out against you, and chased you as bees do, and drove you back from Seir to Hormah. And you returned and wept before Yahweh, but Yahweh would not listen to your voice, nor give ear to you. So you dwelt in Kadesh many days, according to the days that you dwelt.
Okay, so we come to the fifth book of the Torah. As we know, it's called Devarim, which is the plural of the root word davar, which means speech, word, commandment, chronicles, or message, coming from the verb, which means to speak or proclaim or warn or converse, even give promises or threaten. And so what we see here, this fifth book of the Torah of Moshe, Devarim or Deuteronomy, is also understood by many as being the powerhouse that actually holds the vision and the mandate that we have in our Savior, Yeshua Messiah. And when we choose to walk in the very words of Yahweh and obey those words, walking in them as we should, hearing, guarding, and doing and performing his word in complete obedience, we find that this book in itself becomes a wonderful place of anointing, righteousness, and empowerment in the set-apart spirit. It's like this mantle, this cloak of righteousness that we receive a proper equipping and responsibility for living set-apart lives, just as when Eliyahu passed his mantle over to Elisha. And we see when our master said to his taught ones, greater things than these you will do, we see that this book equips us. It really is a wonderful book that celebrates a complete reckoning of who we are as a people, along with the warnings, along with the encouragements and the promises, the counsels, the instructions that are given for set-apart living. And so we know that the entire word of Elohim, from Bereshit to Chazon, contains the complete collection of all his instructions, the warnings of not following those instructions, and then historical accounts of what takes place when you obey or when you don't obey. And we know that it all teaches us to walk in righteousness. It trains us in righteousness, as Shaul clearly made it abundantly obvious to Timotheus that all scripture is breathed by Elohim. So we must go against any notion that some say, oh, man wrote it. Yes, men may have used their hands and a pen, but it's under the breath of Yahweh that the scriptures that we have were made available for us to understand the very voice, the word of Yahweh. And understanding that, we are able to recognize the revelation of the word becoming flesh, dwelling among us and giving us all that we need to live a life that works out deliverance with fear and trembling before him. So when we think of this book, Devarim, or words, we see that this is a powerful book. I've always said, and the reality is we don't just have Devarim, because we have everything. And we praise Yahweh. We have a lot more than what our fathers in the wilderness had. We have a lot more than what those who lived through the ages of the prophets have. We have a lot more than those who walked with Messiah while he was in the flesh, because the letters that were written for us by those that witnessed him in the flesh, we also have that as a collection, along with the revelation that our master gave to others to give to us of how we are to live set-apart lives. So we realize that this is as we start the journey in this book, it really is, all scripture is the living word of Elohim, but this really is a powerful book. This in fact, is the most quoted book in the renewed writings. You know? And Moshe, in this book, reflects on the 40-year wilderness journey in relation to Yahweh's clear instructions that he gave now a betrothed bride and what he taught them. This book is often referred to as the Mishnah HaTorah, and literally means the second reading or copy of the Torah. And it actually comes from a phrase that we find in Devarim 17, verse 8, when it says, and it shall be when he sits on the throne of his reign, he shall write for himself a copy of this Torah in a book from the one before the priests, the Levites. Now that phrase in Hebrew is Mishnah HaTorah Hazot Al Safer, which literally means a double or second copy of the Torah. The word Mishnah means a double or second copy, coming from the word Shana, which means to repeat or to do again. Now, these instructions that we'll get to in a couple of weeks' time were in regards to the instructions that were given to a sovereign that would be sitting on the throne, and his duty would be to write a copy of this Torah so that he governs well and not according to his own ways. And so we find that in this book, as we go through this book over the next few weeks, that Devarim is a repetition of what's already been declared. Or rather, it's a second reading of the laws, the instructions, the Torah, the ordinances, the commands, the statutes that are given to this new generation that were about to enter into the promised land. the men who were now 20 years old and above, that either were not 20 years old and above when they came out of Mitzrayim, or they were born during the wilderness journey. But those that were 20 years old and above that came out of Mitzrayim, they'd already been put to death, except Yehoshua and Caleb, and Moshe was about to be put to sleep too. So here we see that it was necessary for these words to be given to this next generation, and it highlights a valuable lesson for us because it shows that Yahweh's word is the same yesterday and today forever. It doesn't change just because some people didn't obey it. Moshe had not yet died. He was about to die, but he's giving this new generation that needs to take what's been instructed, all the instructions for set-apart living, and live it out so that they can actually embrace the inheritance that Yahweh promised to give them as he promised through Abraham. And so when we go into this Torah portion, we realize how important it is for us to recognize how extremely important the Torah is for us. We know the Torah in its root meaning can give the idea of, aiming in the right direction and heading in that way. And it teaches us the valuable lessons that we get in Hebrews of fixing our eyes on the Prince and Perfecter of our belief so that we can run this race, throwing off everything else that hinders. Now, the only way we can throw off things that hinder and throw off things that can trip us up is by understanding the things that we are to throw off. And if we don't give ear to the proper hearing of the Torah, we'll never know what can entangle us. And a lot of people today are still entangled in corrupt traditions because they're not giving ear to the proper hearing of the Torah every Shabbat. And so we understand that we need to take his yoke, which is his word, his instructions as given through Moshe, revealed through the life, death, and resurrection of our Messiah, on how we actually walk in these instructions. And that's the yoke that he came to give us so that he can break the heavy burden of customized commands of man that have added or taken away. And so we realize that the word for sin, Chatah, carries the opposite in a sense of Torah, where it means to miss the mark. So in other words, you're not hitting the mark. You're not aiming right. You're a bit off. Now, a little bit off is off, And so Devarim summarizes for us the wilderness journey. We looked last week when we ended the book of Bamidbar at the 42 stations that they camped and departed from. But when we look at Devarim, it really is a wonderful book that really is a powerhouse, compact book that is really a recognition of the love that Yahweh has for us and our responsibility to reciprocate that love back to him through a proper obedience. Because that's when we have the full assurance that we know him and we are known by him. And so we see here that this understanding of the Torah leading us to Messiah, because Moshe now led this new generation to the edge of the wilderness, about to enter in. And when they go in, this second reading of the Torah was not to say, okay, you've arrived, I'm no longer with you, you don't do what you want. No, it's important that you guard these words. Once the bride, so the Torah leads us to Messiah. Shaul describes that in the book of Galatians, but that doesn't mean once we understand and acknowledge our Messiah that we throw out the instructions. We actually now realize how important those instructions are. Once a bride understands and begins to fully walk in the Torah, her wilderness days will actually be over. We've looked at Bamidbar in the wilderness. It's a time for hearing, a place for learning, understanding. And as we go through these first couple of chapters, Moshe is giving a historical reckoning of what took place in the wilderness to remind this new generation not to fall into the same errors that their fathers had and never made it in to the very promises that Yahweh has for those that stay in him. So staying in him entails guarding his commands, guarding his Torah, and it's the teachings of Moshe, the Torah, that leads us as a bride of Messiah to her betrothal. And it will be, in a sense, it is the spirit of Eliyahu that leads us to the wedding feast. So we see that the Torah with the Spirit has this transforming power to be properly renewed and be transformed by the renewing of our mind so that our lives are presented as a bride that has set herself apart. So when we understand the intensity of these words, the Devarim, we must realize and recognize that Yeshua, the Word made flesh, our teacher of righteousness, is the goal and the purpose of the Word. So those who listen and take heed to these words that are given as a Torah will actually experience the victory that he's promised to those who overcome in him. And in this first verse, we are able to see some powerful lessons in itself, highlighting our need to assess our lives and to look into the mirror of the word and see, how am I dressed? How am I walking? How am I behaving? How am I speaking? How am I living on a daily basis? Am I choosing the correct path that is heading in the right direction, focused on the mark, or have I veered off, strayed away, fallen away, and on a path that's missing the mark? Am I guarding righteousness, or am I closing my ear, seeking only to be tickled with hearsay? Now, as we look at these words that are given to us here, we can learn some valuable lessons on our need to continually make the correct choice every single day to hear and obey in order to enter in. The book of Hebrews highlights why those in the wilderness that were 20 years old and above, except Yehoshua and Caleb, did not enter in. It's because they did not obey. And it also highlights to us because they did not believe. So belief obedience is what's needed, because belief without obedience is a demonic belief. And so when we look at the Hebrew word in the wilderness, b'midbar, we've learned about that in the last book, in the wilderness, coming from a word which means mouth. So we learn to hear. He takes us out of the chaos and the noise of corrupted words so that he can speak tenderly to us and give to us the clear covenant of marriage that we must listen very closely to on how to stay a betrothed bride and not be like the house of Israel that he divorced because they whored after the nations and didn't guard the words that they were supposed to guard by a proper hearing. When you don't give ear to hear the Torah as you should, you open your ear up to other words that can lure you away. The whore presents words that are very similar. Mishle 9 gives us that contrast between wisdom and the whore that is, to the untrained ear, sounds the same. But to those who have ears to hear, can clearly identify and signify a clear difference between the set apart and the profane, between the clean and the unclean, between wisdom that is from above and between the whore that presents the wisdom of man, which is folly in Yahweh's eyes. So it's time to listen. And in this wilderness is where we learn to hear Yahweh's voice. Now, they were in the wilderness. We are told here in verse 2, it says, we went 11 days journey from Horeb, or in verse 1, let's start off there. That would be a good place to start. Hey, when we look at this, it says, he spoke to Israel beyond the Yarden in the wilderness in the desert plain opposite Suf. And in the desert plain is written in the Hebrew as Ba'aravah, coming from the word Aravah, which means desert or plain or wilderness, coming from the word Arav, which actually means to grow dark or to become evening. That's where we get the word Erev Shabbat, because it's the darkening of the day. And so as the days get darker, so to speak, we know in Yeshayahu we're told that darkness is over the earth and thick darkness over the people, but we are called to arise, shine, because our light has come. So therefore we understand that as the days are getting darker, like the days of Noah, where people are just carrying on in the futility of their corrupted lifestyles, Yahweh sets and places us in a place where we can hear his voice, in the wilderness, in a manner of speaking. The place of hearing, because now is the time where a bride needs to have ears to hear. That's why the 7 assemblies are clearly told, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying. Listening attentively to the perfect Torah of Elohim. And so what we figuratively learn from this, when they came into the wilderness opposite Suf, Suf means sea or reed or seaweed, and in its primitive root form, it actually means to come to an end or to cease. So figuratively, we can learn a powerful lesson from this, that as the days are getting darker, and as we're coming to the end times, so to speak, we have to make the clear choice of whether we actually want to enter into the reign with our master, into the promised land, so to speak, or whether we choose, well, we don't need to obey and what I have now is fine, which many people have chosen. Are we going to guard the commands and be obedient and shine the light of his truth as the days get darker, so we run the way of set apartness and the light of the righteous grows brighter and brighter to the perfect day? Or are we going to let that light be hidden? Kepha reminds us in his second letter in chapter 1, verse 19, that we have the prophetic word made more certain, which we do well to heed as lights that shine in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. So when we look at him starting off to this next generation, the journey that had taken place, we see a great lesson on various choices that we are able to make and must make, actually. You know, when we look at these 5 places that are given here in verse 1, where you've got Paran, Tophel, Hatzeroth, Dizahav, the first 3 teach us powerful lessons on how we are to be in the Master, and we are given clear instructions on how we are to be dressed and how we are to be clothed in him and how we are to be running this race. And Paran, Tophel and Lavan, Paran means place of caverns, but comes from a verb which means to beautify, adorn, or even to become boastful. And Tophel means white, coming from the same root word, verb, that actually can have the meaning of whitewash or unseasoned or foolish. Lavan also means white, coming from the verb to be white or to purify or to become white. And as a verb, it's also translated as making bricks, because they would make the bricks from the lime, which is pretty white in its appearance. And when we look at these 3 places, we understand that as a bride that is making herself ready, we are to be adorned with the truth, and we must choose to hear the words of the Torah and follow them, and be adorned in the righteousness of our Master and Savior, Yeshua Messiah, as we diligently guard to do all that he has commanded. For those who disregard the words of Moshe, they will simply be found to be whitewashed fools, who try to claim to have an appearance of righteousness, yet by their disregard for the Torah and walking in the Torah, they are actually walking in lawlessness, and they refuse to submit under the guidance of the light of our Master and his easy, light yoke that he has given us to be led by, because they still are held fast in the plastered yoke of man-made corrupted traditions and dogmas that have set aside the need to attentively hear what the Torah is saying. Now, this word tafel is actually translated as folly in Yirmiyahu's book of Echa, Lamentations, in chapter 2, verse 14. It says, your prophets have seen falsehood and folly for you, and have not shown you your crookedness to turn back your captivity, but their visions for you are false and misleading messages. The days are getting darker. We know that. Scripture warns us, prophecy tells us, we're living in it. I mean, you don't have to look too far how corrupt it is getting, you know. And sadly, many are still listening to the whitewashed folly of false prophets and fake and deceptive teachers that are simply tickling the ears that Shaul warned Timotheus about, that many will heap up for themselves. And you know how easy it is to heap up for yourselves those that will tickle your ear today. Social media has presented that ability to do so. And if we're not having proper discernment in our hearing, how will we know what's causing us to be cleansed with the purity of the word and what's whitewashing us? You know? And so our Master warns in Matthew 23, verse 27, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly indeed look well, but inside are filled with dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Now, he was giving this serious woe to the scribes and the Pharisees, the very people that were supposed to be teaching the masses how to walk. You know, they were supposed to be presenting the word of Yahweh, but they were like whitewashed tombs, putting on an outward show, but inside it's all folly. We have a choice. We either are adorned by the beauty of the word, the surpassing beauty of the word, or we get whitewashed. You know, it's a clear choice. We who are adorned in the proper instructions of righteousness through the Torah are the ones who are able to overcome the dark days. Keep shining the light, whereas whitewashed walls will be broken down. We see in the book of Chazon, or Revelation 2, verse 17, it says, he who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. To him who overcomes, I shall give some of the hidden manna to eat, And I shall give him a white stone, and on the stone a renewed name written which no one knows except him who receives it. Here's a picture again of the purity that will be accomplished by those who overcome in the Master by staying in him. Now, when we look at this clear contrast between being white through the proper washing, Yeshayahu 1 we're going to look at after lunch, where he says, though your sins are like scarlet, they'll be as white as snow. It's the only washing that can make you clean and pure the way we are, and that's through the blood of Messiah. And being washed in him comes with the responsibility of keeping our garments clean, not just whitewashing them. Yechezkel 13 gives a warning against the whitewashers and the Isabels. Isabel is the one who brought in the official establishment of Baal worship to corrupt the house of Israel. Mixing. Tolerance of Isabel is warned against in Chazon. So keep clean by the cleansing that our Master gives, by the purity of the word, or put on a show and listen to the ear ticklers, and you're going to find yourself on the sickbed of Isabel. Now, when we look at the difference, that's when we look at the first three. Now we look at Chatzerav and Dizahav. Chatzerot means settlement or enclosure, and it pictures for us in Hebrew almost like a trumpet-shaped sheep enclosure. And Dizahav means literally enough gold, coming from Dai, which is sufficient or enough, and Zahav, which is gold. And so looking at this in the presentation of the word, and a choice that we have to make every single day is, as we are approaching our living in these darkened days, we have to ask ourselves, are we about gathering sheep? The goal of our belief is the deliverance of lives. So are we actually shining the light to do our utmost to save many? Because we can't save, but we can call them out. And is our life doing that? And it's not just in the words we speak with whitewashed words, but it's in our actions too. Living set-apart lives that distinguish a clear difference between the way the world operates and the way we walk in set-apartness. So are we making the choice correctly? Are we gathering sheep as we should? Or are we simply amassing wealth for ourselves? Because that's the difference between Chatzeros and Dizahav as a presentation in type. Are we interested in making taught ones? Our Master gave a commission to every single one of us at the end of Matityahu to go and make taught ones, teaching them to obey his commands, immersing them in his name. Our Master has appointed in the body those to equip the body to go out and teach how to live set-apart lives. But not all are appointed as teachers over the body. But we are called to go and make taught ones through our lives as a witness. So are we doing that, or are we only concerned about our own lives and how we can make it? Our Master commanded a clear commission to every single one of us. A lesson that we can learn through this when our Master gives parables is, are we storing up treasure in heaven where moth and rust cannot destroy, or are we chasing riches here on earth? Riches and possessions and wealth that will actually be destroyed by moth and rust. Our Master says, lay up for ourselves treasure in the heavens where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thief does not break in and steal. So these are just straight up to this new generation, just in the record of the journey. It should be an awakening of what mistakes our forefathers have made and what their focus was upon, where we are told by Shaul to mind the matters above, not the earthly. Sadly today, because of the darkened days, many people tend to fix their eyes on what they can see in the physical. And so their belief is crippled in understanding who we are as a people, to be fixing our eyes on our Master and walking in the purity of his Torah and not being afraid. 11 days journey from Chorev to Kadesh Barnea. And here we see Moshe relates that this was 40 years later. They came out of Mitzrayim, they came to Chorev, which is Mount Sinai. Israel spent a year hearing and learning the very clear instructions that Yahweh delivered to them by the mouth of Moshe, which he wrote down. There's no oral Torah. And they took another 38 years to come to a place where this second hearing of the Torah is given to this new generation that must take the responsibility of entering in and possessing the very inheritance that was promised to Abraham's descendants. It was a result of rebellion, stubbornness, and pride that Israel had to sojourn this long. You know, and it was long enough for this rebellious generation that 20 years old and above to die out. And here we see that after 40 years, or at 40 years' time since they came out of Mitzrayim, he's speaking to this new generation. As I said right at the beginning, he's speaking the same words. We learn a great deal that through the wilderness wanderings, that if you rebel and if you remain stiff-necked in refusing to hear the words of the Torah, then the wilderness journey of learning will take longer than necessary, and there may even be a risk of dying in the process. This route from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea, 11-day journey, and as we see, it took a lot longer because of the influence of negativity that the 10 spies brought back after having spent 40 days searching out the land, inspecting it. And so we see here it gave them a sentence of death that took 38 years to ultimately be lived out. Yahweh's word does not return void. And so Kadesh Barnea means set apart. Kadesh means set apart. Barnea comes from the word which means field or open field. And so we see a powerful picture of Barnea comes from bar, which is open field, and nuah, which means to quiver, wander, shake, tremble. And so it gives reference to the meaning of a desert of a fugitive, one that's wandering around. So we realize that as they went for a death sentence over a 38-year period, because remember, they got there after being 2 years in the wilderness already, but it would be a complete 40-year sentence for those that rebelled and disobeyed. You got to think they were wandering around knowing they'll never enter in, and how sad that actually sounds. There are many people today that are wandering around, not going to enter in unless they repent. This is a lesson on the mercy of Yahweh, that he desires that all men are saved. In verse 5, we are told that Moshe undertook to declare the Torah. Now, he made a clear distinction. The Hebrew word for declare comes from the word ba'ar, which means to make a distinction, to make plain, to expound upon, and by analogy, it means to engrave, and figuratively, it highlights the idea of explaining, making clear, and declaring. So when he was giving the instructions, you know what? They should have heard very clearly what it was. It wasn't a foreign language to them. It was clear instructions that were precise on how to live set-apart lives. And he undertook this. Now, the Hebrew word for undertook, ya'al, means a willingness, to show willingness, to be pleased and determined. You know, this highlights a valuable lesson. Moshe was about to die. He could have just said, oh, well, I've had enough of you guys. But he was determined to make sure that these people heard the word again and heard it correctly. And so he spoke with purpose. You know, his willingness to explain and make the Torah plain and distinguished and distinct in their ears highlights that this was something that pleased him to do so. Now, this is a lesson in itself on our lives as we go out and make taught ones. Does it please you? Do you have the true willingness to actually take the truth to people that don't have it? Now, I'm not saying we go out there and bash people over the head with the words of Yahweh, but does it reflect in you the light of our Master and the pleasantness of walking in the truth? Does that actually shine in your life before others? Because that's the starting place. Because if people can't pick up that you are slightly different and then discover that you're actually not slightly, but a lot different, then are you shining the way you should, you know? As you undertake to declare our Master's praise in your life, are you doing it with great joy and actual determination to please the Master? Because we're not there to please men. But I think many people are out there pleasing men rather than the Master, and they find themselves not being determined and showing willingness to actually obey because they're looking for ways to cut corners so they won't be asked a lot of questions. Too long at this mountain. You need to be at the mountain to hear the words, but you don't just stay there. This mountain has a lot of history. It reminds us of all the awesome events that took place at this mountain. They heard the voice of Yahweh for the first time and they trembled. They spent a year learning what to do, how to be a people that are set apart, but they had a promised land to get to. We recognize that We cannot and should not find ourselves, in essence, learning the same lesson every single year. I mean, we learn the same lessons. Hear what I'm saying. A lot of people have twisted this message of you're at this mountain too long, move on. In the Torah walk, I'll say the Torah walk, I don't know how else to describe it, but there are many today who have actually labeled us as still at the mountain when we say the Torah must be read every week. And they're misunderstanding what this is highlighting here. You see, staying at this mountain highlights hearing but not hearing but not doing. And we are to hear the Torah every week, but living it out shows that we've moved on from the mountain of just hearing. The book of Hebrews warns that many ought to be teachers by now, but they need to be taught the elementary matters. In other words, they never moved on, spiritually speaking, metaphorically speaking, from what they heard. So staying at the mountain isn't to say, oh, we don't need the Torah anymore every Shabbat. We've done that already. Just look at you guys. Yeah, you've still got a lot of growing to do. And then a lot of ministries are like that. They're saying, no, man, we've been through the Torah. We'll do topical teachings. We'll move on. But they're missing the point. And you're going to find that hearing ears are going to be lost because they are missing the instructions on set-apart living. Staying at the mountain is a reflection, too long is a reflection of not actually getting up and doing what you've been told. So if you're hearing the Torah every week, year after year, but your life is not changing, that's when you're at the mountain too long. But when you're hearing it each week and you are changing, and every year there's new growth, new revelation, new insight, new maturity, that's when you know that you've actually moving on to take possession of the inheritance of everlasting life that's laying ahead for each and every one of us to see being made complete if we actually stay in his truth, you know. Now, this mountain, we know in the book of Hebrews, it gives a reflection between the mountain in Sinai and Jerusalem, and the clear picture of the Jerusalem that's from above. We are told in Hebrews 12 that we have not drawn near to a mountain that's touched and scorched with fire and to blackness and darkness and storm, and the sound of a trumpet and a voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that no further word would be heard or spoken to them, for they could not bear what was commanded. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot through with an arrow. And so fearsome was that sight that Moshe said, I exceedingly fear and tremble. But you have drawn near to Mount Zion, to the city of the living Elohim, to the heavenly Jerusalem, to myriads of messengers, to the entire gathering and assembly of the firstborn having been enrolled in heaven, and to Elohim, the judge of all, and to the spirit of righteous men made perfect, and to Yeshua, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling, which speaks better than the blood of Hevel. Staying at Mount Horeb would cause us not to see all that Yahweh longs to show us. And so this is certainly a necessary stopping point in the journey of Israel, because it's here that they entered into a marriage covenant and agreeing to the conditions of the marriage covenant. But then you need to keep journeying on. Turn and set on your way. They had to go out, set their faces toward the wilderness. Go in and possess. You'll be reminded, I'm sure, that when we look at this word for going and possess, or take possession, the Hebrew word for possess is yaresh, which means to possess, take possession, occupy or seize, but it also means to dispossess, drive out, disinherit, bring to ruin, destroy. And depending on its use, it can have this either being the meaning of dispossessing or the meaning of possessing, but ultimately it reflects the idea of truly possessing, because you can't possess and inherit properly if you have not dispossessed that which you should not have, because otherwise it's taking place in your life and leaving no room for that which you should have. So in order to properly possess, we need to dispossess and destroy and annihilate, to actually take possession of. Now, what's worth taking note of, we'll get through this in Devarim. Moshe reminds us that Yahweh gave the Torah as a possession to Israel. So the Torah is our possession. So in order to possess the Torah correctly and understand the Torah and learn what it means, we have to dispossess everything that at one stage caused us to not have the Torah in effect in our lives. And so in order to properly possess the Torah, we need to have dispossessed all corrupt, mixed theologies and doctrines of man that twisted the Torah, or even dismantled it completely. And so in order to inherit, we need to dispossess or disinherit. And I hope that makes sense for you, because this is exactly what Moshe, this chapter is giving a historical account so this new generation would not find themselves making the same mistakes and not actually entering in to the very promises that Yahweh has given for a covenanted people. Moshe says he was unable to bear Israel by himself, so men were chosen, they were appointed over hundreds, over thousands, hundreds and fifties. Let's get our count order right. And in verse 11, he reminds them of a very powerful, sure promise of increase. Think about this. They were just over 600,000 men. Remember the first census to the second census, there was a difference, a slight difference in some of the tribes. Shimon, obviously the biggest difference. But you've got to look at this. He says that these would actually be increased 1,000 times or 1,000-fold. That would be well over, if you took 600,000 men, you're looking at well over 600 million. Now, the picture that we get here gives us nice insight into the revelation of Messiah in the book of Chazon. Once we see the wonderful metaphoric parable lesson of the 144,000 that are sealed, and behind them an innumerable number that have come out of and made that, they've come out of the distress. Couldn't get the word there right. So here we see this promise that Yahweh gave to Abraham, and in the revelation of Messiah, it's a vision of this promise coming to fruition, showing that Yahweh's word will accomplish what it has sent out to do. Now, that's the word that we want to be possessing. And in order to possess that word and have life in ourselves, we must dispossess every false word that has corrupted the very instructions of Elohim. In verse 11, he reminds Israel how he told them to choose men who were wise and understanding. We're going to look a little bit later at just the instructions that Shaul gave to Timotheus. What qualifies one to actually be what Yahweh said, wise and understanding? Now, to be wise means to be skilled and learned. And this takes time. It takes determination and discipline. To be wise is evident of one who's increasing in their learning, giving ear, paying full attention to hearing the instructions as a taught one of the master. Mishle 1 verse 5 says, the wise one hears and increases learning, and the understanding one gets counsel. Now, the opposite of a wise one is a fool, because we've got the parable of the wise and the foolish maidens, A word that's generally used in Hebrew for fool is kesil, and it means a dullard, a stupid fellow. I'm using nice words first, and then fool. And a dullard is one that's described as being stupid and an unimaginative person. It comes from the verb kasal, which means to be or become stupid. So in other words, people become stupid when they're not giving their ear to the hearing of the Torah. And it also means to be foolish. So what we see here is that in order to become wise, we must be paying attention to hear God and do the very word of Elohim. When you stop hearing the very Torah that should be heard every week, you actually can become stupid. The wise increase in their learning, and they delight in understanding the truth. It's not a loathsome word to them. It's not a boring word to them. It's something that, what more can I get? What more can I get? There's more nuggets. I want to grow in law. I want to have ears. I want to get. Now we must be on guard against the however many levels of understanding that some mystical teachings teach, because the word is made plain to us through those the masters appointed. Even in the days of Ezra, when they heard the Torah for the first time, then those that were appointed gave meaning to the Torah. So it's not like you have to go to this class to learn level 37 of what that word means. We can grow in our learning and become wise as we walk according to the word, walk in the Spirit, and understanding comes in the doing, and that's when we get wiser and wiser and wiser, guarding ourselves and delighting ourselves in this. Yahweh takes no pleasure in fools, but his pleasure is in those that are earnestly seeking him while he might be found. Wise and understanding we are called to be. So we also understand that Moshe said they were to call men that were known. And we also understand that Yahweh says through Shaul to Timotheus in his second letter, the solid foundation of Elohim stands firm, having the seal that Yahweh knows those who are his, and let everyone who names the name of Messiah turn away from unrighteousness. Men who are known are people who have a good rapport with others. Shaul instructs us in what we're going to look at in 1 Timothy 3, verse 1 to 7 a bit later. What we see here is that those who were to be appointed over the tribes had to be men who were known and had a good witness, were diligent in their seeking of Elohim. At that stage, highlights how they all departed because they didn't believe the good report. They took the evil report. But they have to be people that are living set-apart lives so they can teach how to live set-apart lives. And to name the name of Messiah carries with it the responsibility of turning away from unrighteousness. There are so many today that might even name the name of Yeshua Messiah, yet their lives reveal that they actually haven't turned away from unrighteousness because they're still mixing their lives or are totally in rebellion to obedience and submission to the truth. So we need to understand that this turning away from unrighteousness is a characteristic of being known by Yahweh and knowing Yahweh. And we know that Yochanan Aleph makes it very clear how we know Yahweh and how we know that we love him and how we know that we love each other when we're guarding his commands. Many people are professing today to know Elohim, yet by their works of lawlessness and unrighteousness, they're denying him. And Moshe makes it very clear to this generation the same standard that their fathers didn't get right, and that is judge righteously and show no partiality. Judge righteously. The way we do that is according to the Torah. But if one doesn't know the Torah, how is one able to judge righteously? Today, and for centuries, there have been many who come along and say, do not judge. In fact, they even said it to Moshe in Mitzrayim, who made you judge over us? They said it to Lot, who made you judge and ruler over us? So in many cases, when people are confronted with the standard of the truth as a mirror for their lives that doesn't reflect that standard, most will resort to, don't judge. Now we know the manner in which we judge will be the same manner in which we're judged, and that's a good thing. Because as long as we know the right standards of the word, that's how our lives will be judged, and that's how we are to judge one another. When we all keep the same standard, there will be no partiality. There should be no partiality. So many people claim no judge, don't judge, when we are instructed very clearly in the Torah to judge righteously. There's a difference between judging righteously and judging unrighteously. You know, a verse or words of Shaul, a couple of verses that are clearly taken out of context, and it is in his letter to the believers in Colossae, in Colossians 2, verse 16 to 17. It says, let no one therefore judge you in eating or in drinking or in respect of a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the body of Messiah. A lot of people are saying, don't judge us on how we do things. So they have all their corrupted festivals and say, Colossians says, now you're trying to force us. We don't have to keep the Sabbath. And they twist these words. What Shaul was writing to believers that had come into covenant, that were surrounded by people in their area in Colossae that were not in covenant, that don't let the outsiders judge you now in your obedience to keeping the Sabbaths and feasts. However, the body of Messiah needs to judge righteously in keeping each other intact, keep each other in the right standard, encouraging one another, not to neglect the gathering of the set-apart ones. When does that happen? On the Sabbaths and feasts of Yahweh. We are to hold each other accountable. But we should not let those that are not in the body try and judge us on how we obey the Master. But we are to judge one another on how we obey the Master. That makes sense? This is something that certainly needs to be restored in the body of Messiah today. It's time for the body to take responsibility, be responsible, and keep each other accountable to walking in the truth. Because we all have a goal. A goal of our belief is the deliverance of lives, but that calling, that high calling that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, is to be with the Master forever, so that we can inherit this promise of eternal life in him. And the encouragement that is given in verses 21, do not fear nor be discouraged. This is one of the biggest things that cripple many people's walk in set-apartness, is they're actually afraid of what others will think of them if they obey. They're not outrightly saying it, but their actions are saying it. Their thoughts that come out in their actions are saying. Hebrews 13 verse 5 to 6 says, let your way of life be without the love of money and be satisfied with what you have. For he himself says, I shall never leave you nor forsake you, so that we boldly say, Yahweh is my helper. I shall not fear what man shall do to me. Our master says we should not fear those that can kill the body but are unable to kill the being, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both being and body in Gehenna, in the grave, through the fire of wrath, the second judgment upon the earth that Yahweh is bringing, not with water this time, but with fire. And I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks that so many people face when considering how to speak to a rebellious people is the expected response that they might get. So they fear their rejection of what they're trying to proclaim, so then they'd rather just not say anything. Don't be afraid of people and their words and actions. We looked at Yirmiyahu, was it last week, the week before? Don't break down before them, lest I break you. Now, do not fear, do not be discouraged. Israel as a nation were encouraged by Moshe to be strong and courageous. Yehoshua was told 4 times, be strong and courageous. Have I not told you, be strong and courageous? Now, the Hebrew word that's translated as discouraged is chathath. Now, chathath means to be shattered, to be dismayed, to be broken in pieces, to be abolished, to be broken down and be scared. Now, how many of you in your lives have felt this in your life? Broken down, shattered, scared, almost so dismayed that you don't know how to pick up the pieces. Yehoshua was told in Devarim 31 verse 8 to not be broken down and shattered. Do not be discouraged. It also has the meaning of being prostrate or lying down. And so what we see from this instruction is important for us to understand that we must not fall on our faces, so to speak, when our enemies, which may even be of our own household, come against us. In other words, we're not doormats for them to trample upon. We are to stand our ground, doing our utmost to live at peace with others. Now, it's not always possible, but we don't break down and get shattered because of our obedience to the master, because then actually it's disobedience. Being discouraged is a danger of showing disobedience to the master and the one who you actually are afraid of. After being told to go in and possess the land, Moshe asked that they send out men. He gives this historical account. And they came back and they said, the land is good, but. Moshe reiterates this wilderness journey from verse 26 to 27, and he recalls the rebellion that kept them out from entering in. And this is a serious thread right through the prophets that we see Yahweh continually sending his prophets rising early to speak to a rebellious people that would not guard his commands. It just shows you how compassionate Yahweh is and how his desire for his covenant people to be with him is. He could have wiped out people, even with Moshe. He said, stand aside, let me wipe them out, I'll start over. But that was a test on Moshe, because Yahweh's heart is remaining committed to the descendants of Abraham, a person he entered into covenant with. And he says that these people rebelled and rebelled and rebelled. Book of Bamidbar, we've been through a lot of rebellion and grumbling and, the dangers thereof. And their tongues and their doings were against Yahweh. Yeshayahu 3 verse 8 says, Jerusalem has stumbled, Yehudah has fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against Yahweh, to provoke the eyes of his esteem. They rebelled in word and in deed. And Shaul writes to us in Colossians, whatever you do in word or in deed, you do it all in the name of the Master Yeshua, giving thanks to Elohim the Father through him. In other words, this is the way we bring the proper esteem to Yahweh. When we give weight to his instructions, and whatever we do, our tongue and our doings are for Yahweh and not against him. The most frequent use of the words meri and marah for rebellion is seen in the prophets, where we go through Yirmiyahu, Yechezkiel, Yeshayahu, highlighting how rebellious Israel were. And when you couple mara, which means to rebel, right through Scripture, we can identify what rebellious people are like. Rebellious people are stubborn. Tehillah 78 verse 8 says, "Do not be like our fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation which did not prepare its heart, whose spirit was not steadfast to El." In other words, they weren't taking care of the soil of their heart. So it was growing hard. And so the word that might have been getting in was easily choked out or strangled out or trampled upon that they didn't believe. So they were stubborn, becoming hard-hearted. Another word that's coupled with rebellion is to grieve. When we see in Yeshayahu 63 verse 10, they rebelled and grieved his set-apart spirit, so he turned against them as an enemy and he fought against them. You don't want to be an enemy of Elohim. Rebellion grieves the spirit of Elohim. Shaul tells us in Ephesians in chapter 4, "Do not grieve the set-apart spirit by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption." Do you know how you grieve the spirit? By rebelling. Rebellion is also coupled with refusing. That's a quality of those who rebel. You know, Yeshayahu 1, which we're going to look at later in verse 19 to 20, it says, "If you submit and obey, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword, for the mouth of Yahweh has spoken." We look a lot more at that after lunch. People who rebel transgress because, sin is rebellion, sin is transgression, sin is lawlessness. Lamentations 3, verse 39 to 42, it says, "What? Should mankind complain, a living man, because of his sins? Let us search and examine our ways and turn back to Yahweh. Let us lift up our hearts and hands to El in the heavens and say, we have transgressed and rebelled against you. You have not forgiven." You see, when you transgress, when you break a command, you're a rebel. And Yahweh's against rebels. That's the bottom line. Rebellion also despises the word of Yahweh. Tehillah 107 verse 11 says, "Because they rebelled against the word of Yahweh and despised the counsel of the Most High." Now, the Hebrew word, I like the Hebrew word for despised. It's na'atz. It means to blaspheme, to scorn, to treat with contempt. Na'atz is used in Tehillah 10 verse 13. It says, "Why do the wrong scorn Elohim? He has said in his heart, it is not required." So when people are saying, no, that's not required, they're despising the word. Those who disregard the commands of Elohim blaspheme him and are despising him. They are sinning against him. They're trying him. They're rebelling and rejecting and profaning him. That's the qualities of rebels that we see right through Scripture in his identity of a bride that should have been set apart, and what Yahweh identified this bride as becoming an apostate bride. And 10 words that are used in Hebrew along with rebellion, I didn't go into all of them, but summarized as being stubborn, grieved, refused, transgressed, despised, sinned, tried, rebelled, rejected, profaned. So all of these are the qualities of a rebel. Reject the word of Yahweh, he will reject you. You know, when Stephanos was giving his wonderful witness before the leaders, who at first, they thought he was this guy, he's just shining. He's got something about him, you know. And when they were pierced to the heart of how he was convicting them with, these are the rebels, they stoned him to death. Acts 7 verse 51, he gave a nice historical account of the journey and where they got to and how now Messiah is impaled, and they were the ones who put him on the stake. He said, "You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the set-apart spirit as your fathers did, you also do." Yaakov 2 verse 7 says, "Do not blaspheme that good name by which you are called." And the way that you blaspheme is through rebellion to obedience. So when people are rebelling against the need to hear the Torah every Shabbat, that's just one aspect. These are foundational things. But yet people are rebelling in so many ways. But if they don't get back to the rock of their deliverance, they are going to be rejected by Yahweh. People were greatly afraid. They heard the evil report of the 10 spies and their hearts melted. We looked at that a couple of weeks ago. And they lost heart. Now, masas is the Hebrew word for melt. It means to dissolve or melt, like ice does under heat. But it also means to completely lose heart. It means to waste away and be worthless. Now, this verb masas is actually used in the causative sense, which we understood at the report of the negative spies, they were caused to lose heart, which shows they didn't guard their hearts and minds in the truth. So it's kind of like a picture where they didn't listen to Yehoshua and Caleb, they listened to the 10, and they lacked belief. Their heart wasn't in it anymore. And so many people will quickly lose heart and become very discouraged when they hear negative reports from people who actually lack proper belief in the Master. This is one of the primary weapons in our enemy's arsenal, is bringing negativity to cause people to lose heart and become discouraged. You know, these people were afraid of the taller, greater ones. We're going to look again at that next week as we continue this journey of reminding ourselves what we are not to be afraid of and who we are to fear. And Moshe tells them to have no dread or fear of these giants. Yahweh's bigger than all of that. And what it means to lose heart or to melt one's heart is actually just to become discouraged. How many of you have found yourselves at some point in your life, and maybe even more recently, and perhaps even currently, becoming discouraged? Perhaps you found yourself becoming discouraged because of the worries of this life, the deceit of wealth, the pressures that need to be met that are beyond your ability that you can see physically. Perhaps you become discouraged by circumstances that seem to not be changing the way you'd like them to. Perhaps you found yourself discouraged by the response of many to your proclamation of the truth. You go out with great joy and gusto, only to be trampled upon, and your witness feels worthless. Shaul makes a clear statement in his letter to the believers in Corinth, in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 1, where he says, having this service, even as we received compassion, we do not lose heart. That's in verse 1. And then verse 16, he says, therefore we do not lose heart, but even if our outward man is perishing, the inward man is being renewed day by day. In other words, because of the circumstances, they weren't neglecting the most important element of life, is keeping the inner man fed with the proper daily meditation of the word. What happens when people get discouraged? You find them spending less time in the word, more time in things that they think will somehow appease their discouragement. And in the process, their heart is just getting hardened more and more and more slowly. It's a slow process. If anyone had reason to be discouraged from a fleshly point of view, Shaul certainly. Consider the things he had to go through. Flogged, imprisoned, shipwrecked, beaten. You can read about that in 2 Corinthians 11. But yet, he's making this bold statement, we do not lose heart. He was trying to encourage the believers in Corinth that had a lot of issues amongst themselves and from those outside. And he's saying, listen, look at my witness. I'm not losing heart, so come on. You know, we need to be each other's cheerleaders in a way, encouraging one another. Galatians 6 verse 9, he says, let us not lose heart in doing good. For in due season we shall reap if we do not grow weary. In other words, the command to not lose heart is one that's a present continuous. We must not lose heart. Now, I just want to highlight in the Greek word for losing heart is ekkakeo. And it means to lose heart, to get exhausted, to become faint, to grow weary. And it comes from ek, which means from or from out of. It's used as a preposition denoting an origin or point from where the action proceeds. And the other word is kakos, which means evil, wicked, bad things, loathsome or wrong. So literally, to lose heart speaks of growing weary in doing good as a result of wickedness and evil being present in one's life. And as a result of being involved in doing that which is wrong and loathsome in the sight of Elohim, as measured against the plumb line of the word, is what causes people to lose heart and grow weary. Now, the Greek word for grow weary, ekluo, also from ek, and luo, which means to release, dissolve, annul, break, take off, unbind, or untie. In other words, to grow weary is to break off the responsibility for being set apart, in a manner of speaking. What it highlights is relaxing oneself in a way of guarding the Torah that's supposed to be in our hearts and in our mouths to do it. And through pressures, through persecution, often people grow weary, so they let their guard down. The idea of doing good implies walking in the commands of Elohim, doing the very good works that have been prepared beforehand for us to do. And in a parable of the persistent widow, our master in Luke 8 told this parable that his hearers should not lose heart. And he says, you should pray always and not lose heart. And he gave the parable of the persistent widow to highlight this wonderful lesson and encouragement. Two signs, there can be many signs, but two predominant signs that people are losing heart or growing weary is firstly a lack of persistent prayer. Now, we go into our room and we pray. We don't need to be praying openly before others, but when we are together, we can pray together. But a mirror of the word to look at, if there's any thought of growing weary or feeling drained, look in the mirror of the word and assess your own life. How's your prayer life? How's it going? Have you lost communication with Elohim because of pressures? You know, when Shaul says praying at all times with all prayer and supplication in spirit, watching in all perseverance and supplication for all the set apart ones, what it means is we have this constant ability to commune and talk to our Creator. That no thought or action should actually be done outside of him, because whatever we do in word or deed should be done in his name. So therefore, when we feel disconnected, it means our prayer, our communion with our master, or communication, I don't like the word communion because it has connotation, but the communication with our master is lacking. You know, we must be on guard against letting our prayer life, our consistency in seeking Yahweh diminish. The second kind of clear marker of losing heart is actually growing weary in doing good. In other words, it gets tiresome. You know, for many who are growing weary and lacking or losing heart, it's almost like the people in the wilderness. Do we have to eat this bread again? Why can't we have what we had? Why can't we do? Where are you taking us? So they grow weary in simply doing what's functional for us to do. Hebrews 10, let us be concerned for one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging all the more as we see the day drawing near. It's one of the most frequent verses or passages that I like to quote, because many people are losing heart and growing weary in simply just obeying the command to gather and to encourage the gathering, because they're falling into the habit of neglecting the gathering, which highlights a growing weary in doing good, which highlights that they're actually losing heart. Very sad thing. And there's many reasons why people lose heart. Tribulations, sufferings, trials. Ephesians 3 verse 13, Shaul says, I pray therefore that you do not lose heart at my pressures on your behalf, which is your esteem. Sometimes when we hear what's happening to others, it can cause us to lose heart. And Shaul is saying, don't lose heart. Lawlessness, rebellion, and sin will cause your heart to be growing weary. The love of many is becoming cold. We are to trust Elohim. We shouldn't let frightening circumstances, we shouldn't let giants cause our heart to melt. We are called to trust in Elohim because he's the one who has gone before us. He's the one who fights for us. And when we think of this word for fight, in Hebrew is lacham, which means to fight or do battle or wage war. And from lacham, the verb, we get the word for bread, lechem. So when we are called to fight the good fight of the belief, we can only do that when we are actually diligently meditating on the bread of life and meditating on the Torah day and night, not neglecting our duty in digging into the word and having our lives transformed by the renewing of our mind so that we don't forget how we are to look. We have a good fight to fight, and we have a commander who fights for us and leads us in the charge and has given us the armor to wear so that we can be found to be standing in him, and after having done all, stand and not lose heart. The result of belief without works we can see in verse 35 when it says, not one of these men of this evil generation shall see the good land of which I swore to give to your fathers. Belief without works will cause you not to enter in. However, Caleb was identified as following Yahweh completely. So here is a key for the assurance of entering in to the promises when we follow Yahweh completely. Cling to Yahweh. He fights for you. Keep your heart, the soil of your heart, free from weeds, so that the implanted word can bring about much growth and fruit of righteousness. And what we see here is a clear witness of what it means to truly follow Yahweh when you cling to him and hold fast to his ways. Yehoshua and Caleb are the clear examples for us in that. You know, Moshe says these ones that are going into the promised land, that know neither good or evil today, they're the ones entering in. And I find this verse very interesting for me, because this is the generation, as I said, were either children that came out of Mitzrayim or were born in the wilderness. In Bereshit 2, verse 16 to 17, Yahweh commanded the man, saying, eat of every tree of the garden, but do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall certainly die. We know what happened. Temptation came in, Nachash whispered, and they corrupted themselves and didn't obey and got expelled from the garden. But Yahweh gave them a covering to protect them from being in that state forever, because he had a redemptive plan in place. But what we do take note of here is that this new generation would have certainly been under the influence of their rebellious fathers' lies and corrupted ways of not believing in the promises of Yahweh. But the children being able to enter in and not their fathers, Yahweh was making it clear at this point in their journey that if you obey, you will enter. That's actually the lesson that we get. So the ones that do not know evil and good is going all the way back to the garden. When you obey, you're going to enter in. When you disobey, you're cast out. We recognize that we inherited a lot of lies. We have a responsibility of throwing off those lies, possessing the truth in order to dispossess everything that will hinder our ability to enter in. And rebellion assumes the right that you can do as you see fit, as we see in verses 41 to 43. You know, they thought, hey, and many people think that Yahweh's with them, and they think it's okay to do whatever they want when he's not with them. Everyone put on, he says, your fathers put on their battle gear, and, they put on the appearance of righteousness, and they went up. But Yahweh said, tell them not to go, I'm not with them. The Ark of the Covenant didn't go. And they were beaten down all the way to Chorma. Chorma means devotion. It's a picture of discipline. Yahweh disciplines those he loves. And we see here, this is a picture of men putting on their own armor and not the armor of Elohim. And this is a sad picture of what corrupt presentation of worship has done. Putting on an assumed armor that doesn't actually fit being dressed in Messiah as high priest and king forever in the order of Melchizedek. Driven back from Seir to Chorma. They were beaten down. They went up very proud, thinking, we'll go and we'll take it. Oh, yes, okay. And Yahweh allowed them to be beaten. Discipline can cause tears. But who does Yahweh listen to? They came back and they wept, and Yahweh says, and Moshe said, but Yahweh did not listen to you. We know that Yahweh hears those that love him. Now we know Yahweh hears everything. I mean, he's not void of hearing things, but this is a picture of acceptance. Many people are making big prayers, but they're not accepted by Yahweh. We need to learn from this, that if we stay in a position of obedience, Yahweh hears our prayers. To the wrong, he says, what right have you to recite my laws and take my covenant in your mouth when you've hated instruction and cast my words behind you? We understand that there's a clear difference between Yochanan, Aleph, Gimel, and Bet teach us valuable lessons on how to know that we know Yahweh and how to know that he hears us and we hear him. And that's when we guard the commands. That's what it comes down to. When you're not guarding the commands, you can think that he's hearing you, but he's not hearing you. And so just as people are hearing but not hearing, so Yahweh in turn says, I'm not going to hear you when you don't listen to me. So they dwelt at Kadesh many days because they had to learn how to be set apart. They had to learn all over what true set apartness means. And this wasn't a different set of rules. This was the same standard of set apartness that Yahweh called their fathers to walk in. Now some of this new generation thought they could take it upon themselves to do it their own way. They got beaten down and they had to now learn this is how you need to be. You see, our lives are to be set apart to Yahweh every single day, not just on a Sabbath or on a feast, every single day. Lest we find ourselves being beaten down by our enemies to a place where we recognize if we are not completely devoted to serving Yahweh, we're not going to enter into the promises that he's given us. We are to be a set-apart people, and we learn from this journey. Next chapter, he's carrying on with this walk, but we learn valuable lessons on what it is to be a people that are not throwing off Yahweh's marriage covenant, but are actually clothed in it and representative of a bride that has her ears open and attentive to his voice. Cheryl saying, Shabbat Shalom, praise Yahweh for this learning channel. Where would we go if Yahweh did not uphold this ministry? We are more than blessed to listen to our Master's word explained according to his Ruach. I've been waiting on the Ruach to share this today. His work and those teaching his work and those teaching need financial support as well as encouragement, friendly conversation. Yeshua had his taught ones to converse with on earth. Craig and Kalin also need the body to chat to them. Oh, thank you very much. That's very encouraging. So encourage one another. I don't know how to respond to that and say praise Yahweh. Thank you for those kind words, Cheryl. And Cheryl does encourage often. So, we're not here saying, please encourage me, please encourage me. We're here to teach. This is what we should be doing, and we need to experience it in our lives. We're under threat of being destroyed if we don't guard our set-apartness as a body together. And that's a real threat. We mustn't just think that the threats of the enemy that's seeking to destroy us are something we should just scoff at. They're real, but the only way to guard against them and not be afraid of them is by actually being obedient in every aspect of one's life. And yes, I don't want to go down that path right now about financial support, but yes, it is. And times are getting tougher. But we're remaining committed to our call. 20 years we've been in full-time ministry, and 16 of those years has been in complete obedience to Yahweh. We've been on a journey, and anybody who'd like to know that journey in more detail as Moshe is going through journey to other generations, you're welcome to contact us, and we'll gladly go through our journey with you and love to hear your journey too. But in understanding this, the most important thing is, as a body, we have responsibilities. We're taking our responsibility seriously of equipping the body. And in turn, we hope that the body that Yahweh connects us with is taking their responsibility in making sure we can keep equipping the body. So thank you, Cheryl, for those words of encouragement. And let's get on to chapter 2. Okay, Rachel.
Then we turned and set out into the wilderness, the way of the Sea of Reeds, as Yahweh spoke to me, and we went round Mount Seir many days. And Yahweh spoke to me, saying, You have gone around this mountain long enough, turn northward, and command the people, saying, You are about to pass over into the border of your brothers, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir, and they are afraid of you, so be on your guard. Do not strive with them, for I do not give you any of their land, no, not so much as one footstep, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. What food you buy from them with silver you shall eat, and also what water you buy from them with silver you shall drink. For Yahweh your Elohim has blessed you in all the work of your hand. He has known your wandering through this great wilderness. These 40 years Yahweh your Elohim has been with you. You have not lacked any matter. And when we passed beyond our brothers, the descendants of Esau who dwell in Seir, away from the way of the desert plain, away from Elath and Etzion Geber, we turned and passed over by way of the wilderness of Moab. And Yahweh said to me, Do not distress Moab, nor stir yourself up against them in battle, for I do not give you any of their land as a possession, because I have given Ar to the descendants of Lot as a possession. The Emites had dwelt there formerly, a people as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. They were also reckoned as Rephaites, like the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emites. And the Horites formerly dwelt in Seir, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them, and dwelt in their place, as Israel did to the land of their possession which Yahweh gave them. Now rise up and pass over the Wadi Zered. So we passed over the Wadi Zered. And the time we took to come from Kadesh Barnea until we passed over the Wadi Zered was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of battle was consumed from the midst of the camp, as Yahweh had sworn to them. And also the hand of Yahweh was against them to destroy them from the midst of the camp until they were consumed. And it came to be, when all the men of battle had finally perished from among the people, that Yahweh spoke to me, saying, This day you are to pass over at Ar, the boundary of Moab. And when you come near the children of Ammon, do not distress them nor stir yourself up against them. For I do not give you any of the land of the children of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the descendants of Lot as a possession. This was also reckoned as a land of Rephites. Rephites formerly dwelt there, but the Ammonites call them Zamzummim, a people as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. But Yahweh destroyed them before them, and they dispossessed them and dwelt in their place, as he had done for the descendants of Esau who dwelt in Seir when he destroyed the Horites from before them. They dispossessed them and dwelt in their place, even to this day. And the Avim who dwelt in villages as far as Azah, the Kaphtorim who came from Kaphtor, destroyed them and dwelt in their place. Arise, set out and pass over the Wadi Arnon. See, I have given into your hand Sihon the Amorite, sovereign of Heshbon, and his land. Begin to possess it, and stir up yourself against him in battle. This day I begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the peoples under all the heavens, who, when they hear the report of you, shall tremble and shake before you. And shake because of you. Then I sent messengers from the wilderness of Kedemoth to Sihon, sovereign of Heshbon, with words of peace, saying, Let me pass over through your land on the highway. I shall go on the highway and turn neither to the right nor to the left. What food you sell me for silver I shall eat, and what water you give me for silver I shall drink. Only let me pass over on foot, as the descendants of Esau who dwell in Seir and the Moabites who dwell in Ar did for me, until I pass over the Jordan to the land Yahweh our Elohim is giving us. But Sihon, sovereign of Heshbon, would not let us pass over, for Yahweh your Elohim hardened his spirit and strengthened his heart, to give him into your hand, as it is this day. And Yahweh said to me, See, I have begun to give Sihon and his land over to you. Begin to possess, in order to possess his land. And Sihon and all his people came out against us to fight at Yahat. And Yahweh our Elohim gave him over to us, so we struck him and his sons and all his people. And we took all his cities at that time, and we put the men, women, and little ones of every city under the ban. We left none remaining. Only the livestock we took as plunder for ourselves, and the spoil of the cities which we captured. From Arae, which is on the edge of the Wadi Arnon, and the city that is by the Wadi, as far as Gilad, there was not one city too high for us. Yahweh our Elohim gave all to us. Only you did not go near the land of the children of Ammon, anywhere along the Wadi Yabok, or to the cities of the mountains, or anywhere as Yahweh our Elohim commanded us.
Okay, so here in this chapter, Moshe is continuing with his telling or recounting of the wilderness journey to this new generation. Some of them, it might have been most of the journey in this journey. Others would have heard stories of what took place a few years back. And so we can also glean some powerful insight when we consider our own daily travels as we embark on a life of sojourning in our Master in set apartness and the misdeeds of the flesh. This chapter starts out by saying, we turned and we set out into the wilderness. And this was after having been at Kadesh many days. So now they'd learned to be set apart in type, and they now set out. They had the purpose for us to learn how to be set apart is to actually be productive in our walk. That's what it comes down to. We're not here saying, oh, that's a nice story, I'd like to know more about. We're learning it so that we can be it. But just sitting and becoming information grabbers and not doing is going to keep you at a place where you are going to find yourself without Yahweh, because his cloud moves, his fire moves, And so we are told here the progression. So he's going through this journey again, and he highlights, we went to Mount Seir many days, and after having already discussed Seir, which means shaggy, well, we know Seir, which is shaggy, also it's the place of Esau. It represents for us as well as those who walk in the flesh. And what we can see from this progression is after being set apart and learning how to be set apart, we come to a place where we begin to deal with and confront the very things of the flesh that need to be destroyed. You know, when we come into covenant, you get immersed through a confession of repentance and you turn away from wrong ways. As you're growing in the knowledge of what it means to be set apart. I mean, we don't know everything when we first come to the Master, but every week as you hear Moshe and the prophets and the writings and you begin to grow, and I didn't know that. And then you learn to, as you get more set apart, you learn to distinguish between the set apart and profane, and you deal with the very things that surface. It's like as the heat of the word heats you up and the refining process, the dross surfaces. Oh, I didn't realize that. And we are equipped to get rid of it, or so we should be. And so, but like all things, there's a time to deal with the mountains that we can consider as the mountains of the flesh, and there's a time to move on. And once again, Yahweh says, you dwelt at this mountain long enough. You can't be fighting the same fleshly battles year after year after year, because then you're not winning. You know, and the warning that we get in the parable of the man who cleaned his house and got rid of the demon. The demon was very upset and he went and got 7 other stronger ones and came and found the house all clean. Oh, thank you for cleaning it up for me. And entered into the man he knew was worse off than before because he didn't guard his house. That's the parable that we get. And so if you are walking on this walk and you go after a cycle and after another cycle where you should be growing and you should be able to teach others how to actually walk set apart, but yet you're still struggling with those elementary things that you knew you should have said no to right in the beginning, or as time went by and you learn, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, but yet you're still finding yourself, I know I shouldn't, but year after year, then you're at that mountain too long. And you're at risk of staying at that mountain, which is not going to get you into the promise. You know, a lot of people have left, metaphorically speaking, Mitzrayim or Babylon, whichever way you want to look, corruption of worship, falsehood, enslavement to the flesh, and to a degree, they've come to grips with the necessity of living a set-apart life, yet they find that they can never leave Mount Seir, metaphorically speaking. Why? Because they're unable to actually let go of some of those fleshly habits that they actually really enjoy. They think that they can't live without. And you know, there's many things that I think people can give witness of things they've struggled through, and especially if they've overcome, they can be a witness to other. You know, I know how to, like Shaul could witness the things that he was going through and saying, don't lose heart because look at me, I'm still going. But I could give a whole list of things, but you know, there's some things that jump to mind and you think of some of the excuses that people tend to have on this walk. You know, one of them is, why do people think that I'm not going to let go of alcohol? You know, it's like, set apart believer, don't tell me I can't have my beer or my wine. You're at this mountain. How many times are we going to go around this mountain explaining to you you're in service? As long as the master is in the set apart place, we should be set apart. And so many people are still at this mountain dealing with the stuff, but they're not dealing with it because they're still at this mountain. That's an example. It's one example. Whatever other fleshly habits that people can't let go of, it's either because they really love those habits and they're trying their best to stay at this mountain long enough where they'll find that this habit's acceptable. We need to learn to let go of things that might have actually had us invest a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort into. But when we count the cost, when Shaul says, I consider all of this rubbish for the sake of knowing Yeshua Messiah, that's a true taking up one stake, following the master and not looking behind. But it's a scary place for people to be when they have to let go of things that have given them their identity, you know, especially in circles that they now, how can I be with these people and I don't do what I did? You know, I didn't see it as harmful. It's just a little this, it's just a little that. But now living set apart lives, people feel shattered because who am I? And this is where it's so important to learn who you are in Messiah. And this is where set apartness, and one grows in that. But there are certain points where you need to be showing growth. That's what Moshe is highlighting through these descriptive things that he's teaching this generation, because they shouldn't go into the promised land making the same mistakes, because they'll quickly get vomited out, just as Yahweh vomited out the nations who were not supposed to be there, that he drove out. Leaving Mount Seir, we were commanded, and I say we because this is our history. So we've got to No, one of the things that begins to become a living word for us is when we begin to identify this history as our history, which it is, in Messiah. Because now that we've died to self and we are raised to resurrection life in Messiah, grafted into him by his blood, we looked last week at Matityahu 1 with the genealogy of Messiah. We are now in his genealogy, and in his genealogy, this is our history. So we must recognize that leaving Mount Seir, and we were told to turn northward, which highlights a great lesson because they were coming from the south. They had a destination to go to. Literally, it's a practical journey of going north to where Yahweh called them to inherit. But we also learned some wonderful lessons on the wording that's used here, on the battles that we face on a daily basis. Now, again, the word turn panah means turn towards a direction, and the word means face. So it's, turn your face toward the way you need to be going, to be looking at. The Hebrew word for north or northward comes from the word tzafon, which comes from the primitive verb, which means to hide or treasure up. We know in the encampments that we go through when we go through the book of Shemot and Bamidbar and looking at the different tribes, we see the northern tribe that was headed up by Dan and how they encamped around the tabernacle. Dan means judge. Threaded right through Scripture, we see a clear lesson in what comes from the north. And the book of Zephaniah, which means to be hidden by Yah, coming from Tzafan, which is also judgment or northward, is that Yahweh in his disciplining of his bride and his divorce of his one house was he would send his enemy, the enemies of his bride, as a tool in his hand of his discipline, and they would come from the north. The Assyrians came from the north to take the house of Israel and scatter them among the lands. Babylon came from the north to take Yehuda into a 70-year captivity. But the promise that we're given in Zephaniah is the fact that when we obey the Master, we'll be hidden in the day of his coming judgment, which is representative of that which comes from the north. So we need to ask ourselves, if we're going to accomplish our desires in the flesh, then we will not have a hiding place. The name of Yahweh is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and are safe. Yahweh is our hiding place if we stay in him. Tehillah 119 verse 11, we see tzafan being used and translated as treasured up. When it says, I have treasured up your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. What a powerful statement that is. That's not treasured up, throw away the key. I've heard this once. Thank you. I've done it. I don't need to do it. No, this is a treasuring up, which means I'm guarding my heart. I'm making sure that the parable that our Master gives of the treasure in the field and the pearl of great price, they are both parables of finding the truth and counting that cost to forsake all, to retain the truth, and treasuring up the word in his heart so that we don't sin against him means I am going to apply that word in perfect set apartness. Mishle 2 from verse 1 to 9, it says, my son, if you accept my words and treasure up my commands with you so that you make your ear to attend to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding. For if you cry out for discernment, lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek her as silver and search for her as hidden treasures, then you would understand the fear of Yahweh and find the knowledge of Elohim. For Yahweh gives wisdom. Out of his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. And he treasures up stability for the straight, a shield for those walking blamelessly, to watch over the paths of right ruling, and the way of his lovingly committed ones he guards. Then you would understand righteousness and right ruling and straightness, every good path. I mean, I encourage you later, spend time just meditating on these 9 verses, because then we understand the parable of the field, the hidden treasure. We understand the parable of pearl of great price. We understand the clear parables that our Master gives of guarding our hearts. Mishle 10 verse 14 says, the wise treasure up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool is near ruin. So the word is in our hearts and in our mouths to do it. Fools can speak a lot from their mouths, but they reveal the wickedness in their heart when they honor the Master with their lips, but their hearts are far from him. How do you know their hearts are far? When they're not guarding the commands. Now, Moshe says that the descendants of Esau that lived in Seir were afraid of us. So therefore, we are to be on our guard. The fact that we know that Yahweh fights for us and that we need not fear the threats of the enemy doesn't mean we are not to be on our guard. You see, it's when you get relaxed in one's ability to guard set apartness when the enemy can infiltrate your life very quickly. And we are to begin to understand the effect of Esau on our lives, because it's a lesson on the fleshly matters that can cripple your walk very quickly if you don't guard your stand of set apartness in the Master. We were told to pass over, not stop over. You know, a lot of times people say, I know I shouldn't do that, but I just want to take a quick peek. Pass over the fleshly matters. And you learn to do that when you truly walk in the covenant of our Master as a renewed man and a renewed identity in Messiah. We know the Hebrew word for avar means Passover. And from that, we get the term Ivri, which means one from beyond or one who crosses over. Avram was the first one to be called a Hebrew, one who crosses over, Ivri. The plural is Ivrim, the Hebrew word for Hebrews. Okay? So we recognize that, you know, true Hebrews, the ones who have passed over, are the ones who have acknowledged the Passover lamb, repented and been immersed in his name, partaken in his body and blood, and are living set-apart lives, and can easily pass over the fleshly matters that battle against the being, can put to death the lusts of the flesh, because we are living as Hebrews, ones who have passed over from darkness to light. We are to exercise great care. When it says here, so be on your guard. You know, Shaul gives us in the book of Romans this picture of this wrestling that takes place between flesh and spirit. And he uses the analogy, how am I supposed to do it? But he's giving this picture to help us understand it is a real fight. You know, most of the time the fight is in oneself about fleshly matters over spiritual matters. And the clear difference to identify is it in line with the Torah, then it's spiritual, or is it in line with the flesh of, you know, I'm trying to cut corners because I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that. And that wrestle happens a lot of the time. But we are to guard ourselves against these things that can cripple our walk of set apartness. And this Hebrew phrase, so be on your guard, comes from the words me'od and shamar. Me'od is muchness, diligently, full, immense. Shamar means to guard. We know that word. So this is an intense guarding that's called for. So be on your guard. You know, how this isn't just, you know, God to do what, you know, you'd think today, many of you might have seen some movies and series about, you know, how ridiculous some guards are, you know. Some of us have been in the military. We know that guards in the flesh tend to sleep while they are supposed to be awake. But this is a lesson. Be on guard with muchness. That's the way, and that's really what's highlighting here. When we are to guard, it means we are to be awake. We are to truly be making sure that we are guarding. Mishle 7 verse 1 says, my son, guard my words and treasure up my commands with you. Here again, this highlight of treasuring. Treasuring his commands so that you don't sin cannot be done if you're not guarding the word, not making sure that you're watching over it. Our master says, blessed are those hearing the word of Elohim and watching over it. That word for watching over in the Greek phulasso is also translated as guard, similar to the Hebrew word shamar. So how we guard his word and treasure his word is by watching over it, not just, oh, well, I'll glance over it with my eyes, but watching over it is to carefully exercise to do what it's instructing. And we don't lack. And we are to overcome the enemy. From verse 8 to 23, there's a summation of the wilderness wanderings that Moshe, he recollects on the various groups of people that were encountered along the way. And when we look at these people, we understand that we're in this walk where we have to fight the good fight of the belief, and we have along the way things that we must overcome, that we must conquer, if we are to guard our hearts and treasure up his commands so that we don't sin and fall prey to the things of the flesh and be led astray. Now the Emites, or in Hebrew emim, means terrors, coming from emah, which means dread, fearsome, terror, terrible thing. You know, there are many people who many things and people that will do their utmost under the spirit of the enemy to strike the fear and dread of what ifs into your life. Frightening thoughts and statistics that try to cripple you. You know, our master's above statistics. I hope you understand that by now. So we need to recognize that the terror and fear from outside is a real threat that we must be on guard against. The Anakim that they encountered, plural of Anak, which means long-necked. Again, it's a highlight of the giants of old. We know that Yehoshua's victory in Rephidim is a wonderful lesson of recognizing as long as Moshe is being upheld correctly every week on the Shabbat and able to meditate day and night, we can have victory over the proud and lofty ones, the giants that are trying to destroy us in our lives. The Rephaites comes from the Hebrew word Rephaim, plural of Rapha. Now, they were the inhabitants that were an area located east of the Yarden. It represents that which is deceased, coming from a root verb which means also to heal or to become fresh or to be repaired. But Rapha can also have the idea in Hebrew of being lazy or becoming lazy, abandoning or relaxing or sinking. So this reminds me about those with lazy hands, letting their hands hang limp, as opposed to lifted hands in set-apartness. We cannot sink and relax ourselves in corrupted, dead teachings that merely feed the flesh and tickle the ears, but we must be strengthened in the living word that never changes. Strengthen the weak hands, make firm the weak knees. Say to those with anxious heart, be strong, do not fear. See, your Elohim comes with vengeance, with the recompense of Elohim, he is coming to save you. Mishle 15 verse 19 says, the way of the lazy one is like a hedge of thorns, but the way of the straight is a highway. Now you try and work in a hedge of thorns. Ouch, 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 oh, oh. And for days you got thorns you're trying to get out, hinder your ability. But the way of the straight is a highway. You can run, the way of set-apartness. The Chorites means cave dwellers. And it comes from the word chor, which is a hole, opening, or sockets. Now the Chorites were those who formerly dwelt in Seir. They were dispossessed by Esau. And we can understand how Esau, representing close relation but not walking in the truth, because Yaakov and Esau, it's a clear picture of walking in the spirit and walking in the flesh. Esau can represent for us what we've come out from in fleshly matters, maybe Christianity, and we see how Christianity dispossessed and took possession of many cave rituals, dark things that were done, retained a corrupt worship that were done in holes and caves, presented today openly as harmless celebrations, but actually they are life-threatening. Christmas, Easter, Halloween, all these things that Esau, as lived out in the fleshly way of living an assumed worship, as in Christianity, have adopted the dark cave matters of worship. And those who won't come out of corrupt worship systems are like the cave dwellers who hide themselves in the sick and twisted traditions. And when the wrath of Elohim is being poured out, they're going to continue to hide themselves and say, let the rocks fall on us, because they can't face the truth. We realize that all of these people that Israel faced and passed by or overcame in the wilderness journey are lessons for us on how we are to overcome many matters in our walk of set-apartness as we live in a scattered state in the world today. The Zamzumim. This is coming from the word zamam, which means to scheme, to plot, to devise. So the Zamzumim were the schemers, the plotters. Now Tehillah 37 verse 12 says, the wrong plots against the righteous and gnashes his teeth at him. So we see here what the wrong do is they're just trying to find a way to lash out against us for doing what's right. Acts 7 verse 54, again with Stephanos giving a witness before the corrupted leadership. It says, in hearing this, they were cut to their hearts and gnashed their teeth at him. And they plotted to put him to death, which they did. And Shaul was giving witness at this stage. So what we learn from the terrain of the Zamzumim is that we must not gnash our teeth at the truth. when it cuts deep into our heart and calls for a change in our lives. And it reveals that which must be destroyed. Beware of the schemers, the plotters, those who are always seeking ways to hook people into their latest theory and ear-tickling theologies that displaces the need to simply come every week and listen to the Torah. Always people trying to scheme another way, think they know better, not sticking to the pattern. The avim, from the word avi, which is perverter, coming from the verb ava, which is to bend, twist, pervert, commit iniquity, or to do wrong. Shaul, as I said, warned Timotheus that a time will come, which is here in our day, certainly, where they shall not bear sound teaching, but according to their own desires shall heap up for themselves those teachers tickling the ear, and they shall indeed turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to myths. Acts 20 verse 30, it says also, from among yourselves men shall arise, speaking distorted teachings to draw away taught ones after themselves. We must be on guard against those who are twisting and perverting the truth. That's overcoming the avim. The kaftorim comes from the Hebrew word kaftori, which is a crown. And the kaftorim were descendants of Mitzrayim, the son of Ham, which you can read about in Bereshit 10. And they were people from Crete, possibly related to the Philistines, who destroyed the Avim who dwelt in Gaza. It's important to understand the people, the Avim that were destroyed in Gaza, because it reminds us of those who set themselves up as rulers and claim to have the true authority. They're going to be destroyed, just as the sovereigns of Azar were destroyed and were prophesied as ones who shall perish in Zechariah 9. Verse 5, it says, Ashkelon shall see, or sees it and fears, Azar too, writhing in anguish, and Ekron, for her expectation has dried up, and the sovereigns shall perish from Azar, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. And when we consider the people of these territories that Israel would pass over, we can identify many of the struggles we still face on a daily basis today, against the plotters and the schemers and, the twisters and the corrupters and the cave dwellers. Yahweh says, arise, pass over. He fights for us, but we need to be marching according to his standard of set apartness. And so we need to understand this call to arise and pass over highlights a lesson that we can never fully understand what this means if we are not guarding the Sabbath and feasts, because it teaches us how we are to be clothed in our master and keep our garments clean and know the distinct sound of his voice so that we can reciprocate a love back to him in our lives, representing a pleasing sound of obedience in everything we say and do. Now, Sichon means warrior. So the Amorites, mountain dwellers, also comes from the word which means to command or speak. And they were dwelling in Heshbon, which means stronghold. And what we learn from this as a valuable lesson in Messiah in our own lives, that Yahweh has truly delivered us from the stronghold of the warriors of the mountain dwellers, so to speak. Those that speak against the Most High. Yahweh's delivered us from that, so we need not fear them. He's done this. And because he's done this, there's more than just raising a shout for us to do, we must begin to possess. And when we see this clear picture of the word begin, which is halal, which is to kill, bore, or pierce or wound, we must put to death the things of the flesh. Everything that's exalted itself against the knowledge of the Most High, we must put to death, because that's where our battle is. It's not against flesh and blood, but it's there against the principalities and rulers of this dark age. We were told, and we are continually told, to stir ourselves up in battle against him, against that which sets itself up against the master. The Hebrew word for stir yourself up, gara, means to stir up, engage in strife, contend. In other words, we need to be able to contend against that which is trying to destroy us. In the book of Hosea, as a parable of Ephraim that needs to return, in chapter 2 it says, strive with your mother. In other words, contending means I'm not participating in, I'm strongly against it and opposed to it. We've just come through a season where many have tried to corrupt us by saying, join us, and we are contending against the wrong fleshly ways, the cave-dwelling ways that are corrupt. Mishle 28 verse 4 says, those who forsake the Torah praise the wrong. Those who guard the Torah strive with them, because we're standing and contending for the belief. The book of Yehuda, I know Patrick likes to remind us of those. It's contending for the belief, fighting the good fight, you know. Beloved ones, making all haste to write to you is in Yehuda 1 verse 3. Concerning our common deliverance, I felt it necessary to write to you, urging you to earnestly contend for the belief which was once for all delivered to the set apart ones. Fight the good fight of the belief, lay hold of everlasting life to which you were called, and have confessed the good confession before many witnesses. Shaul told Timotheus and tells us the very same words today. And in verse 25, when it says this day, the word of Yahweh is living and active. And when we hear these words, it's again, today when we're hearing these words, we must arm ourselves with the truth of what we are learning in. Every time I read this verse, I am strengthened and reminded that we have nothing to fear from the enemy, as long, though, as I am rooted and grounded in love, which is to be in true obedience to the Master's commands. You know, the report will go out as we shine the light of his truth in obedience to him. And in verse 26, it says here, you know, well, first of all, Yahweh says, this day I begin to put the dread of you and fear of you upon the peoples under all the heavens, who will hear the report of you and they'll tremble and shake because of you. I mean, think about that. If we are truly standing, then what have we got to be afraid of? But you know what? When the enemy is afraid of you, he's going to try and destroy you because he doesn't want to be afraid of you. And in verse 26, it says, I sent messengers of peace. We must do our best, if possible, Shaul tells us in Romans 12, on our part to be at peace with all men. The reality is, Shaul is giving us a bit of a clue here because he says, if possible on your part, which means there are times when it's not going to be possible because, you know what, strife and contentions happen. But from our point of view, we must retain the shalom of our master because he tells us in Romans, we have shalom, we have peace with our master if we walk according to the spirit and not according to the flesh. So we see here, didn't matter what message of peace Sichon was given. Sichon said, no ways. I'm not taking your peace. He was stubborn. Now, many stubborn people today don't want to have the shalom that we are trying to bring across through the good news. And so he came up against them, and it says here that Sichon, which is a picture of those that war against us, coming out to fight against us, he came out against us at Yahatz. Now, Yahatz means trodden down, and that's exactly what he thought he was going to do to Israel. Now, you must understand history. Sichon and Og were two of the biggest sovereigns living in those days that many nations were extremely afraid of, and you didn't challenge them. And so Israel didn't challenge, they simply asked, can we please pass through? We'll pay you. You know, we try to send at first words of peace, but Sichon thinks, I'm going to trample you down, and Sichon got trodden down. And this is a picture of when our master again comes to tread the winepress in his wrath of all the enemies, the Donnell, in a sense, that's gathered for destruction. Then, having this victory, he didn't leave one alive of Sichon. I mean, what a victory. But we got commanded to put under the ban. And the Hebrew word for put under the ban, we must understand this is important for us to understand, especially as we learn the Torah more and more. You know, in verse 34, when it says, we took all the cities at that time, we put the men, the women, the little ones, and every city under the ban, we left none remaining. Now, the Hebrew word for under the ban is haram, which literally means to ban, devote, exterminate, annihilate, utterly destroy, or even set apart. It can also have the idea of setting apart to Elohim, which once it's been given, it must be destroyed so it can have no human use made of it, so to speak. Carries the understanding that it becomes off limits. Now, we recognize that as we take ground, so to speak, in our walk of obedience in the Master, we learn what's off limits. And what's off limits must remain off limits. Because once it's put under the ban, it literally must be destroyed to you. It has no way or effect of actually becoming something of value or of use or purpose to you. Because if you don't put stuff under the ban that should be destroyed and wasted away and annihilated completely, it can become a snare to bring compromise to one's obedience. No city too high. How awesome is that? Romans 8, verse 31, what shall we say? If Elohim is for us, who's against us? It's always in the context, Yahweh's for those who are in him. And he's very jealous over his bride, and he will protect his bride. But to stay in him will afford you this protection. But when you go out of him, you are exposing yourself to being trodden down by the warriors that are seeking to destroy you. So there are warriors out there. There's an enemy that wants to kill. And the way to stay in the master is simply guard his commands. And then we realize and recognize that no warrior is greater than Yahweh. I have strength to do all through Messiah who empowers me, Shaul told the believers in Philippi. And we realize this. You know what? Yes, we have strength to do all, but only through Messiah. And how he empowers us is through his word. It speaks volumes as it highlights the true reality that without Messiah we can do nothing. And how we possess the witness of Messiah that is empowering us is through the guarding of the commands. If he isn't empowering us, we can't fight. And we need his word to empower us, lead us, and lead us in victory, bearing the witness of who he is. You know, the Greek word for strength to do all is ishkuo, which means to be strong, have power, be healthy, strong enough. And it has the idea of having sufficient ability, power, or strength, both physically and morally. And our ability to be a strong and trustworthy witness and ambassador of our Master's reign and his coming is only embraced as we submit to and learn to obey the very commands that we have ears to hear. You know, Shaul in Acts 9 verse 22 says, kept increasing in strength and was confounding the Yehudim who dwelt in Damascus, proving that this is the Messiah. This was after his transformation, if you will, or his conversion from being a warrior against the truth to being an ambassador for the truth. You know, at one stage, we were all warriors against the truth when we were walking in fleshly ways. Now, having died to that and being raised in Messiah through immersion and confession of him, we too need to be increasing in strength. And the joy of Yahweh is our strength. And when we think of the word, the joy of Yahweh is our strength, they were spoken in a day when the people heard the Torah for the first time after coming back from captivity and were tearing their garments and weeping on the day of Yom Teruah when they should be celebrating the sound of victory. And they were told, this is not a day to weep, for the joy of Yahweh is your strength. So it's a context of understanding that. You see, we understand that the joy of Yahweh becomes our strength when we are hearing his word and applying it, stripping away what needs to be stripped and celebrating a life of obedience in him. That's when we begin to increase in strength. And the idea of increasing in strength, I like going to gym. So I liken it of the fact that if you do less gym, you will get weaker. But as you continue, you do get stronger and stronger. You can do more, you can achieve more, you grow in your ability, and then you got to maintain that standard. I mean, it's so. But if you don't exercise, that's why Shaul says that, you know, physical exercise is of some value because it teaches us a valuable lesson, but reverence with contentment is great gain. And so we need to understand, we learn in the physical aspects of our life what we are to be doing in the spiritual aspects. So we must not neglect our ability in getting stronger in the word. Because if you're strong in the word, you can stand your ground, lift up the shield of belief, and use the sword of the Spirit to destroy the fiery darts of lies that the enemy tries to throw at you. You know, Romans 4 verse 20 to 21 says he did not hesitate about the promise of Elohim through unbelief, but was strengthened in belief, giving esteem to Elohim and being completely persuaded that what he had promised he was able to do. This is now Abraham. He's giving witness of the belief of Abraham. He was persuaded by Yahweh. We too need to be persuaded. Shaul went and he says, I want to persuade you to know Yahweh. Persuading people with the truth is not a corrupt way, but it needs to be seen in our lives of what we do to cause them to want to rather have what we have that's a lot stronger than what they have. How much are you being strengthened in the belief? Belief comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Elohim. If you say you are completely persuaded that what Yahweh has promised he is able to do, then ask yourself if your life and the pattern of your life and your walk lines up with that confession of belief. Especially when you are facing battles that you did not expect to face. Or do you at times find hesitating about the promises of Elohim, promises that are yes and amen in Yeshua Messiah? Guard the commands and obey the commands, and we have the assurance of victory. When Yeshua says, stay in me and I stay in you and you'll bear fruit that lasts, he means it. We're going to look at that after lunch too. You know, Tila 119 verse 115 says, turn away from me, evildoers, for I observe the commands of my Elohim. That's a commitment that we should be able to readily be able to make in a confession when the temptations are out there to try and lure us away. No, I observe the commands. When people say, why don't you do it? You say, because I obey. Because I am guarding with muchness. Me'od shamar. With muchness, I guard the commands. So turn away from me, evildoers. Don't waste your time trying to lure me away. Let's go to chapter 3.
Then we turned and went up the way to Bashan, and Og, sovereign of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. And Yahweh said to me, do not fear him, for I have given him and all his people and his land into your hand, and you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, sovereign of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon. So Yahweh our Elohim also gave into our hand Og, sovereign of Bashan, with all his people, and we struck him until he had no survivors remaining. And we captured all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we did not take from them. 60 cities, all the district of Argob, the reign of Og in Bashan. All these cities were fenced with high walls, gates, and bars, besides a great many unwalled towns. And we put them under the ban, as we did to Sihon, sovereign of Heshbon, putting the men, the women, and the children of every city under the ban. But all the livestock and the spoil of the cities we took as booty for ourselves. And at that time we took the land from the hand of the two sovereigns of the Amorites, that was beyond the Jordan, from the Wadi Arnon to Mount Hermon. Sidonians call Hermon Sirion, and the Amorites call it Sinir. All the cities of the plain, all Gilad, and all Bashan, as far as Salcha and Edrei, cities of the reign of Og in Bashan. For only Og, sovereign of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaites. See, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. Is it not in Rabbah of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits is its length, and 4 cubits its width, according to the cubit of a man. And this land which we possessed at that time, from Aroer, which is by the Wadi Arnon, and half the mountains of Gilad and its cities, I gave to the Reubenites and the Gadites, and the rest of Gilad and all Bashan, the reign of Og, I gave to half the tribe of Manasseh. All the district of Argob, with all Bashan, called the land of the Rephaites. Yair, son of Manasseh, had taken all the district of Argob, as far as the border of the Geshurites and the Maachathites, and called them after his own name, the Bashan of Havoth Yair, to this day. And to Machir I gave Gilad. And to the Reubenites and the Gadites I gave from Gilad as far as the Wadi Arnon. The middle of the wadi was the middle of the wadi as the border, as far as the Wadi Yabok, the border of the children of Ammon, and the desert plain with the Jordan as the border, from Kinnereth as far as the sea of the Arava, the salt sea, below the slopes of Pisgah on the east. And I commanded you at that time, saying, Yahweh your Elohim has given you this land to possess. All you sons of might, pass over armed before your brothers, the children of Israel. But let your wives and your little ones and your livestock, I know that you have much livestock, stay in your cities which I have given you. until Yahweh has given rest to your brothers as to you, and they also possess the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving them beyond the Jordan. Then you shall return each man to his possession which I have given you. And I commanded Jehoshua at that time, saying, Your eyes have seen all that Yahweh your Elohim has done to these two sovereigns. Yahweh does the same to all the reigns which you are passing over. Do not fear them, for Yahweh your Elohim himself fights for you.
Okay, so I got a WhatsApp a few minutes ago, so it's recent, from Renee, and it's got Ishkahor, question mark. I don't know. So Renee, I did send a question mark back, so I'm not sure what you're asking. Did I say something? Ishkahor? I don't know. Maybe you can expand what your question is so I can make sense of it. Okay, so continuing on with the victories that Israel had faced, remember, he's reminding this generation of the mighty acts of Yahweh. Now, he's recording the victories that they had in the wilderness journey, which would have been very real to many of them that had experienced these victories. And so after the victory of Sihon, they went, and then they had a victory over Og, sovereign of Bashan. And we see a powerful witness. Og was one of the last of the giants. I mean, if you look at the size of his bedstead, I mean, it was like 3.9 meters long. And, I mean, that's a big bed, And again, they put under the ban everything that was there. Og is a representation, again, of that which is puffed up. Og means long-necked. He was the king of Bashan. He represents that which is high and lofty, trying to set itself up against the master. And when we see the journey that was taken here, one of the primary things that I get out of what we've learned from this chapter is that, yes, Og was living in Edrei. Edrei means a goodly pasture. Now, interestingly enough, there's a part of the territory that Yehoshua, when they inherited the tribe of Naphtali, they set up a town and also called it Edrei, although it wasn't this one. But they wanted to kind of understand the name of a goodly pasture. We also understand that, when we look at the world, which Tehillah is it? When I saw the people prospering, is it 37? Was 73? I've got my numbers the wrong way around. Until I looked into the Hechel of Yahweh and I saw their end. We can easily get discouraged if not guarding our hearts by seeing how it seems like everybody's living fine in the goodly pasture, so to speak. The lofty, proud ones, not listening. But here we learn a lesson that we are to be overcomers in the Master. And we are to guard ourselves against those things that we think have some kind of power over us or threat over us if we don't be like them. And the primary thing that we get out of these verses here is do not fear. We're going to come up against things that are going to wrestle in our flesh against, that's better for you. Look how that looks better. When clearly the way of set apartness is better. And so Tehillah 22 verse 3 says that Yahweh sits enthroned on the praises of his people, not on being afraid of other things. So we can never truly be praising our master or living a life of praise if we're allowing the effects of the world that in the flesh might look greener and look like better, good pastures. But it can cripple our ability to be true worshippers in spirit and truth, And here we see in verses 3 to 7 the result of complete trusting belief. There was a complete destruction of the enemy. No wall was too high. No city walls were too high. Nothing is too high for Yahweh to overcome because he sits enthroned above all. And everything was put under the ban. But Shaul reminds us again, because a lot of these lessons are primary lessons for us today about living in the flesh or living in the spirit, in obedience or corruption. Romans 8 verse 13 says, if you live according to the flesh, you're going to die. But if you live according to the spirit, you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you shall live. Colossians 3 says, put to death your members which are on the earth. And he says what these are: whoring, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, greed of gain, which is idolatry. And whatever we do heartily unto the master, not to men, knowing that the master From the master we shall receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the master Messiah that we serve. You see, we must remind ourselves who we're serving. Now, yes, some of us in the body are employed by employers, but you're still serving the master with your gifts and your talents. And then they took the land that was needed to be taken. The witness of the giant bedstead was to remind them how Yahweh is the one who brings the victory. And remember, when the 10 spies brought the evil report, yeah, the giants in the land, we like grasshoppers in their eyes. Og's bedstead would remind them that no giant is too big for Yahweh to destroy. And when our belief is in him, we see that later, many centuries later, David took out Goliath. You see? So we understand that we should not fear the worldly giants, so to speak, that are fleshly matters. Do not fear them. I mean, right through these 22 verses, we see right at the end here, do not fear them because Yahweh himself fights for you. Now, he fights for those that are in him, dressed in him. That's why he says, put on the armor of Elohim, because it's a military call. The commander wants to fight, but he wants an army dressed correctly so that he can fight for his army that he loves, his bride that he's purchased. You know? Yirmiyahu was told to gird up his loins, arise. We looked at that a week or so ago, and speak to them all that he commanded. Don't break down. You see, we won't break down when we are correctly dressed in the Torah, in the armor of light, the armor of Elohim. Yirmiyahu was told very clearly, and we are told, if we break down before them, Yahweh would break us, because he'd give us over to that which we're afraid of. If you're going to be too afraid to stand up and speak the truth, being girded with the truth, you're going to get destroyed along with the wicked. You know, our master makes it clear. I just want to touch on this before lunch. Matthew 10 says, whoever shall deny me before men, him I shall also deny before my Father. Now, the Greek word that's translated as deny is arneomai, and it means to contradict, to deny, to reject, to renounce, disown. And this word can actually have a twofold meaning for us, as we are to renounce and disown all works of darkness and lawlessness, but we are not to deny our master as we guard his commands, because this is our righteousness. 2 Timothy 2:12-13 says, if we endure, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he also shall deny us. If we are trustworthy, he remains trustworthy. It is impossible for him to deny himself. Now, what does it mean to deny the master and his mighty like power that he's given to us and everything that we need for life and reverence? If we don't endure, the reality is we won't reign with him. That's why here is the call for the endurance of the set apart ones, those guarding the commands and possessing the witness of Yeshua Messiah. Lack of endurance under pressure reveals a denial of the master. Now, the Greek word for deny is translated as refused in Hebrews 11, verse 24, when it says, by belief, Moshe, having become great, refused to be called the son of the daughter of Pharaoh. He knew his identity. And this is part of our recognition today of what we are to deny and what we are not to deny. We realize that dying to self, we are no longer who we are or were. Now we are in Messiah, and we must not deny ourselves in our identity of Messiah. It's an identity crisis that's on today. You know? We mustn't refuse, or we must refuse, put it that way. We must refuse to be associated with that which we were brought up in error. It's not who we are anymore. Now, the Greek word arneomai is used in the Septuagint when Sarah denied when she laughed. When, she said, I didn't laugh. Sarah said, denied it, saying, I didn't laugh, because she was afraid. You see, a lot of times when people are gripped with fear of the giants, they deny the master because of fear. She said, Elohim has made me laugh, and everyone who hears it laughs with me. That's what she said in Bereshit 21, verse 6, when she celebrated this, Now, why I'm highlighting this is because the Hebrew word for denied is kachash. Now, kachash means to disown, to fail, to be untrue, to lie. And the first time that we see this word being used in Scripture is in reference to Sarah denying that she laughed. So she wasn't being truthful. We also see this in Mishle 30, verse 8 to 9, a wonderful parable of a lesson on guarding our identity in Messiah, when it says, remove falsehood and a lying word from me, give me neither poverty nor riches, feed me my lawful bread, lest I become satisfied and deny you and say, who is Yahweh? And lest I be poor and steal and seize the name of my Elohim. Now in the book of Iyov, in chapter 31, it says, I have put my trust, if I have put my trust in gold, or called fine gold my refuge, if I have rejoiced because my wealth was great, and because my hand had gained much, if I have looked at the sun when it shines, or the moon moving in brightness, so that my heart has secretly been enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand, that too is a punishable crookedness, for I would have denied El above. So even when his friends were challenging him, not going to get into much details about Iyov, but what Iyov was saying, he says, if I've done any of these things, that's a denial of my master. If you put your trust in earthly matters, in your wealth, in the ways of this world, you have denied Elohim. Workers of unrighteousness that have no boundaries are in denial of our master, and therefore will have no savior to save them from the coming destruction. Now, I didn't print out things, but kachash is the Hebrew word for denial, and it's spelt with a kaf, shin, and a tav. I can put it up for you. Maybe do it like this. Like that. I'll fold my page. Sorry, it's a kaf, a shin, a kaf, a chiyat, and a shin. Sorry, a kaf, chiyat, and shin. Let me put it up like this. I'll get my picture folded and I'll zoom it into the camera so you can see it, and you guys have good eyesight. So there you go. There's kachash. Okay. Now, as I said, you've got a kaf, which is a picture of an open hand. It can speak of, a hand speaks of what we do, our works. The chiyat is a picture of a tent wall. It represents separation, outside, inside. It also reminds us of living stones being built up. And a shin is a picture of two front teeth, which represents chew, meditate, destroy, what teeth do to food in order to digest it properly, but it also highlights meditation or simply highlighting the word that comes forth from our mouth. So when we deny, denial in this pictographic form makes it very clear, working against the word, working as separated from the word. Titos 1 verse 16 says, they profess to know Elohim, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient and unfit for any good work. You see, there are many who are going to be declared as not being known by the master because they've worked lawlessness, because they've worked against the word with works of darkness. That's a denial. So when people refuse to follow the pattern of obedience laid out in the Torah of Moshe, warned against disobeying through the prophets, witnessed through the accounts of sovereigns that did obey or didn't obey, and the renewed writings of a witness of Yeshua bringing to light the revelation of how we are to stay in the Torah so that we can inherit, anybody who does not submit to that are denying the master. They claim to call on him and do many mighty works in his name, but when they don't guard the commands, they cannot possess the witness. And if you don't possess the witness through a proper guarding of the commands, you can say all you want to, and he's going to say, I don't know you. So the question that we need to remind ourselves or ask ourselves and be reminded of is, am I listening correctly? Or am I actually just letting things bounce off my ears because I'm not taking in what I need to do? We have this prophetic word made more certain, which you do well to heed, as a light that shines in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your heart. The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn that shines ever brighter to the perfect day. I started earlier with the words of Kepha, talking about letting that light rise in us and grow brighter and brighter. So too, we're living in dark times. This beginning 3 chapters or 2 and a bit of Devarim and our journey over the next couple of weeks must cause us to be a people to recognize how important it is for us to have ears to hear. Because Moshe was relating all these events to this generation that needed to enter in and take possession. And you can never take possession if you don't have ears that are willing to hear what the Spirit is saying, so that you can stand armed in the truth and have the victory and give a proper victorious shout of praise to our Master who's in the heavens. Any thoughts on today's readings? Anything you want to share? No? Strength to do. Oh, that's ornitho. Where was it? I've got to get that. That was the Greek word. Yes. Ishkuo. Yes, that's it. Not ishkahor. Yeah, yes, ishkuo. That's the Greek word, which is having strength to do. Okay. I hope that, yes, we must have strength to do all through our Master who empowers us. You can look at the notes. I do have the Greek words there in the notes for further reference. But on that note, we're going to take a break for lunch, and we're going to come back and enjoy going through Yeshayahu 1 and Yochanan 15, along with another passage that I always couple together with that, and then looking at the words that Shaul gave to Timotheus. Let's pray. Father, we bless you and praise you, and we thank you that we can sit here on your Shabbat, that we can delight ourselves in your truth and be reminded of the fact that as we stay in you, we have the assurance of victory. But the responsibility that you've given us is to stay in you. And staying in you is a joy that you've given us to continue in, so that we can be on guard against anything that tries to hinder our walk. We thank you that you've given us this history of victories to remind us that even on our journey, there's many victories still to be had, which means there's many battles to be faced. But as we endure, we can be made mature and lack nothing, as you continue to cause your word to make us a people who are rooted and grounded firmly in your perfect love. We thank you that you've given us all that we need to serve you, and serve you with great joy and gladness. And I ask that you would equip us continually to keep shining very bright, the very light of your truth that is to be in us, so that we can represent your kingdom that is coming right here, right now, here in this darkened earth. Thank you that we can celebrate this victory that we are being reminded of with a meal together, a Sabbath covenant meal. And I do pray your blessing and favor and shalom over every home that is connected by your perfect design, according to your perfect will for our lives. And we bless and praise you and give you thanks for your provision and protection in the name of Yahushua our Messiah. Amen and amen.